I really, really love open source. So, of course, it's disappointing to choose a non-open license or feel that that had to happen. But at the same time, I was an executive for so long that I also understand the challenges and empathize with what that corporate leadership was going through. The open source community is highly skeptical of venture-backed open source businesses, and totally understandable. The most annoying thing about AI right now is managing context.
Hi, this is Brian Douglas, and you're listening to Open Source Ready, a bi-weekly series where we discuss the evolution of open source software and its impact on the tech landscape. Along with my co-host John McBride, we'll explore topics like open source AI, the business, and the life and sustainability of open source. Open Source Ready is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor of developer-first startups. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us at x.com/opensourceready.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Open Source Ready. I'm here again with Brian. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. We've got some sun today in Oakland, so I'm not wearing a sweater inside. So it's going to try to go touch grass later.
Yeah, that's good. We're here today for a very, very exciting episode. We have Mitchell Hashimoto, the legend himself. How are you doing?
I'm good. I think that's an overstatement, but I'm good. Thanks.
Mitchell, why don't you give us a little introduction to who you are, what you've been working on?
Sure. So I'm a developer by background. I'm sort of best known for founding a company called HashiCorp, which created Terraform, Vault, Vagrant, sort of a slew of other tools in the DevOps cloud space. But besides that, I've always sort of done various types of dev work. I did a stint of macOS native development and got paid for it. I was a full-time JavaScript person for a few years. Flash back in the day. And then nowadays, I left HashiCorp about, when we're recording this, almost 2 years ago. And I've been sort of working part-time since then, being more of a dad, less of an employee. And my main focus in my work has been an open source terminal emulator called Ghostty. It's been a work of passion, and I think it's pretty cool, and it's doing pretty well. And that's sort of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, you've sort of taken the terminal, UI, UX space in that regard, sort of taken it by storm. I mean, in my eyes, it almost seems ubiquitous for, the terminal of choice, not only on Mac, but now it seems almost on Linux as well. What was that journey like? Like, how did you, wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to build Ghostty in Zig, nonetheless? Like, what was that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, it was mostly accidental. After HashiCorp, I wanted to work on something, honestly, the complete opposite. I literally looked at different dimensions of what I did for 12 to 15 years in the DevOps space and said, what's the opposite of that? And so I was like, okay, I did a bunch of server-side stuff. Let's do something desktop. I did sort of higher level. It wasn't as high level as, say, front end, but higher level stuff was like, I want to get back to like counting CPU cycles. I never touched the GPU while we were at HashiCorp. I was like, let's do GPU programming. And I sort of like had all these properties. And I was like, what can I work on that fits these? So I actually like had the technologies I wanted to use first, which isn't usually the best way to make a product, but I had that first. And I was like, what could I build? And I was just thinking that all the software that I helped create and work on at HashiCorp was very like CLI focused. And I felt comfortable with the terminal ecosystem, but I realized that I didn't really know like the details of how those things work. And so I was like, a terminal emulator, let's do that. And it was just an educational project. And as I was working on it, I sort of felt like there was sort of a trade-off choice that would lead to a terminal emulator that didn't really exist and that I wanted. And so that sort of organically led to Ghostty. But definitely I didn't like go into it thinking like, oh, terminals need to be worked on. Like I thought they were done, along with I think a lot of people.
Yeah. It was a pleasant surprise for me, having gone from like iTerm2 to, I don't know, Alacrity at some point and tried Kitty. Ghostty is the first one that feels to me like, oh, this is truly like a macOS native experience. And then even on Linux, having that kind of like cross native experience that sort of breaks on some of the other terminals. So my personal thanks to you.
Thanks. That's what I love to hear. I have a lot of people that say, oh, this is a Mac only app. And it's like, I have to correct them and say no, but also that's a feeling of success to me. So like, that means we did the Mac app so well that people think that this was only built for Mac. And the history is actually funny because the Mac app didn't come till a year after we started. It was Linux first. And then the reverse also happens, which is that it looks so much like GNOME console or something that a lot of people feel right at home, but then they're surprised to learn it's also a Mac app.
Yeah, that's great. I have to ask you also just on like, your workflows and like developer tooling that you've been building.
Mm-hmm.
I've taken great inspiration from your Nix configs recently. One of my friends, I asked him, I was like, how the heck do you even get into Nix? I recently started a new job where they're using a bunch of Nix machines for like developer machines and reproducibility. How did you get into that ecosystem of like, deep Nix Linux configs and stuff?
I mean, I think it fits my personality really well. Like just looking at like what I worked on with Terraform and stuff. I mean, it's just like I wanted a reliable, consistent as code way to rebuild my desktops initially, and really still the focus of my Nix usage was desktops, and it's sort of bled out since then to other stuff. But that's what I was looking for. Like it's the age-old classic problem of I just got a brand new laptop, and I think that's literally what motivated it. I was like, I had an old MacBook Pro and I had a new MacBook Pro, and I was like looking at them, and I was like, how do I make this better? Like, how do I make this? I don't want to spend the next few hours setting it up. So how do I make this better? And so I put in the work, did the Nix stuff, and now it manages my Mac, it manages Linux machines, it does CI for me. Like it's grown a lot since then, but I know that a lot of people get really tired of sort of the Nix like hoo-rah-rah that happens everywhere.
Yeah.
I try to stay relatively quiet about it. When someone's excited, I get excited and talk about it, but otherwise I try not to talk too much about it because I'm not trying to sort of be like a preacher about it, but it is still, I think, one of the most daily impactful piece of technologies I've adopted, but totally no disillusionment. Like it's a very difficult piece of technology to adopt.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus one to that. Brian, have you gotten a chance to try Nix yet?
No. And we sat with the Flux folks a couple podcasts ago, and I come from the way more the JavaScript space, the Ruby on Rails space. So like I haven't had a need to mess around with any sort of Nix at the moment, but I sort of fill my pool as I'm now doing a bunch of Kubernetes things and trying to catch up over there. And I have a machine over here I'm running Linux, but other than that, like I haven't had a reason to it. But I wanted to ask a question around the Zig choice.
Sure.
Because it sounds like you mentioned Ghostty being a product. This is purely open source. It's like there's no paid tier or anything like that for it.
No.
Excellent. Yeah. So the choice around Zig, like, do you feel like you're sort of trailblazing within that community? Because I only know a handful of like companies that are using Zig. I don't know a lot of projects that are like fully using Zig in production.
Yeah, it's definitely trailblazing. It feels a lot like when I adopted Go. The only company I knew of using Go besides like Google maybe was Heroku at the time. Docker didn't exist yet. These obvious Go users didn't exist yet. So there were a number of us coincidentally adopting Go, and it sort of feels like that was Zig, and maybe a little bit earlier though. And so definitely like I've had to sort of rebuild a bunch of libraries that I don't think you would rebuild in a mature ecosystem. It was the same with Go. I don't know. I think that if someone listening to this was a Go developer from anywhere from like 2012 to 2016, like you couldn't download a Go project without getting like Mitchell H or HashiCorp dependency, because like it's not like we wanted to build those dependencies, it's because they didn't exist. So we sort of built a huge ecosystem that's sort of matured out at this point. And Zig's sort of the same way. I've had to build a ton of stuff. I've had a lot of fun with the language. I think it's great. I still think it's probably a little early for like a company to adopt it. Like there's no language stability and stuff like that. And so I think we're in the phase where you're probably going to see like community growth, but not quite professional growth at the same scale. I still think that's probably a few years out.
Yeah. We had a few of those dependencies in Cloud Foundry way back in the day when Pivotal was still a company. And I think they were pretty early adopters of Go as well, just transforming that whole thing from, giant Ruby thing to Go stuff. What do you look for in new technologies? Like there's so many choices to make out there. Not only languages, but like platforms or things that you might like be bringing into like a bigger stack of platforms of things. Like, what do you look for when you're evaluating technologies?
Well, I feel like now with like a kid and where I'm at, I'm just looking to be productive and get stuff done. So before, I think I would choose technologies much more philosophically. This just like is a beautiful design or something. And now it's a lot more pragmatic of like, this will make me more productive and it'll sort of prevent me from blowing my own foot off, and the rest it's growing. And I think the most important personal thing at that is that like I need to have fun writing it, so or using the technology. So I'm also just like, if I'm at a point where I'm using technology and it's like not sparking joy, if I'm not being paid to do it, like I'm not going to use that technology. So that's always been a really important part. I mean, I think that's a pretty core part of my personal ethos of like when we were building HashiCorp tooling too. I felt like I always tried, whether I succeeded or not, very arguable, but I always strived with that initial user experience, download, run, to like find some sort of happiness in a thing that you wouldn't really say sparks happiness.
Man, yeah. I mean, I was just thinking about how a lot of the HashiCorp tools I remember using, even Terraform today, still like it's very delightful to be able to like just go and do a thing, and it kind of has that almost Unix, Linux ecosystem of like does one thing very well. It's gonna like spark a lot of joy in that. Was that part of the design principles with tools like Vagrant and stuff?
100%. I felt like, especially when I started working in sort of the DevOps cloud native space, this is like 15 years ago now, but I felt like all these tools that existed were really made for what you would call like a classic system administrator at best, and just for machines at worst. Like there was the config formats, the CLI, if they had one, the way you invoked them, like it was all so difficult for a human, and it wasn't very fun. And I wanted to I think this is because I came from an environment where I was sort of building like consumer web applications as well as desktop applications. I think that was my upbringing. Like I think I came to DevOps with this mentality of like, I want to build, I guess, like consumer grade DevOps tooling, which isn't, of course you can't give a consumer Terraform, but like, that was what I was striving for, was like make a standard web developer think they could do this. Like they could download Terraform and be like, I don't need a system, then I could do this. Of course, you need those people, but like that's what I wanted them to feel.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Terraform and HashiCorp and everything, I mean, one of the things that has come up a few times has been the license change that happened and the acquisition. I'm curious if you'd be willing to kind of walk us through what that experience was like, relicensing some of the projects. Yeah, and just, maybe where your head was at with some of that.
Yeah, for clarity, you're not like on the board or anything like that for HashiCorp? Or are you
No.
completely separate now at this point?
I'm totally separate. And honestly, with the acquisition closed as of like about a month before this recording, I'm at a point where I could really kind of talk about anything. That being said, I don't think I have too much exciting to say.
Sure.
The license change happened when I was already like not an executive, leaving the company. I think I got like a 2-week notice that the license change was happening. Like I wasn't part of that whole discussion. And the acquisition fully happened after I left. I had no idea if HashiCorp was talking to IBM. So I don't have a ton to add except like sort of what I felt, I guess, at the time. And the way I describe sort of the feeling with the license change is that I really, really love open source. So of course, like it's disappointing to choose a non-open license or feel that had to happen. But at the same time, I was an executive for so long that I also understand the challenges and empathize with what that corporate leadership was going through to probably motivate that change. Again, I didn't see the full RFCs that led to it, but like the way I've talked with people, the way when I talked about it with Armand and the CEO and stuff like that, was always like I had these two sort of battling sides inside of me, and I'm not fully mad or fully happy about anything. So that's sort of all I could say. I mean, it'd be better if there was a reality we lived in right now where that didn't happen. You can't just magically just say they couldn't have done it though, because I don't know the full details.
Yeah, because HashiCorp came up in a special time in open source, and you guys had a lot of success and had the IPO and etc. We had Adam Jacobs come on board. I'm not sure if you've seen any of his recent conversations and podcasts around doing open source first and open source ready type companies.
Yeah.
Like, do you feel like we've kind of passed a movement where like you can't just go MIT license early days and then do the VC route and then hopefully never have to, like, there's a relicensing happening eventually?
Yeah, I think, because of HashiCorp, but also because of like a dozen other companies. I mean, like there's no singular person I think you could blame here, but I think the open source community is highly skeptical of venture-backed open source businesses, and totally understandable. Again, this is one of these difficult things because I always wonder, like, if HashiCorp didn't get venture funding, like if we didn't spend all that money like developing this software, what would exist? Like, where would we be? I'm not saying, I just don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, my open source side wants to live in this world where we could build this bazaar that people collaborate and build incredible software. The practical thing I've seen both in the open source and as an executive is like, that's not what happens. It happens with the biggest, most successful projects. I would say like Kubernetes is in that camp, the Linux kernel's in that camp. But like, even if you're looking at fairly large databases, like you go through the committer list and the top 10, 15 are paid by one entity to do it. And there's this long tail of awesome contributors like that definitely commit bug fixes, ecosystem help, small features, things like that. But it's like majority just run by one entity. And I had this hard time reconciling, like, how do you fund that? How do you, at the end of all that, when you've reached success, when you've reached this point where the community probably would benefit from sort of more open governance, how do you make up for that huge investment that company made in order to reach that point? And it's probably sounding like right now that I'm like, I don't know, for these business license changes or something. And I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to just show like the inner conflict that I have of how do you get success as open source, but how do you make it sustainable? And, getting donations or sponsorships even less than like $1 million a year, which is 99% of all of them, doesn't sustain the software. Like the salaries that I just know from us, the salaries that we were paying to support each of our open source projects were dramatically more than $1 million a year. And yeah, it's hard. I recently did like an exercise because I'm looking into a bunch of nonprofit stuff since HashiCorp, and I've donated to the Zig Software Foundation and things like that. And I recently did an exercise with some accountants where we found all the open source 501c3s. So that excluded like Linux Foundation and stuff because they're a C6. We listed sort of all these C3s and we bucketed them by size. And I think there was like single digit numbers that had over $1 million a year in donations. And there was a lot that were way under. And it's like, you cannot build a Terraform with that budget. It doesn't happen. It's done now. So it seems possible now because you could be more in a maintenance mode. But the point to here doesn't happen in the timeline it did without much more investment.
Yeah, I think that's honestly incredible insight. We're almost seeing something similar playing out right now with this project called Nats.io and the CNCF.
Yep.
I mean, I 100% have empathy for that corporate entity because it's like, and this coming from probably one of the most staunch, free and open source software guys in the world, we all get it. But like, I mean, we don't have an eyes into the books of that company, and they're, contributing like 97% of or something commits that they said. I've even seen this play out in the Kubernetes ecosystem. Like, I agree, it's a very well-established project and very like stable. But I was also at VMware when it got, kind of gutted by Broadcom. And I was working on upstream Kubernetes. And then all those people just got scattered to the wind.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not going to go and spend their free time, contributing to Kubernetes, without really getting paid for it, I guess. And today it's like what I would argue probably just a handful of people that are keeping that core technology and core community going.
Yeah.
It's a little wild. Yeah. I mean, what is your takeaway on the Nats situation?
It's the same conflict that I have. I think on one hand, I totally get that if you, sign to the ink that you're donating a project and whatever came with that, then trying to find a way out of that feels bad. Like it feels like a rug pull. On the other hand, I read the CNCF blog posts and I sort of I recognize that I'm with a couple people that are associated with the CNCF here, but I got to the section where it's like what the CNCF has done. And I was like, so you basically maybe spent $90,000 to $100,000 on audits and trademark legal, like the millions of dollars that led to the stability of Nats. Like this is a huge imbalance, like of what happened here. So it's difficult again. Like it's, and I know Derek really well. I never used Nats actually, but I've only heard good things about it, and I can only guess what he's going through. But again, like when I put on the founder hat, a lot of empathy. When I put on the open source hat, I'm a little bit upset. It's difficult.
Yeah.
For listeners, I don't think I even mentioned I switched over from the LF to the CNCF running ecosystems there. But I got to sit in some conversations, and I think it's just a really awkward situation that everyone's trying to, be open source and public about what's going on. because it's just an awkward situation where it's very clear the company that Derek represents was doing the lion's share of all the work, and it just wasn't alignment for the CNCF. And I think in the historically, like everyone wants to figure like a foundation, it's going to work out, like we're going to get more people adopting it, but this never played out that way. And so now we got to figure out what to do next.
Yeah, I really think that it only works for very, very large established projects. That's my pessimistic point of view. Kubernetes makes a ton of sense. Like Apache web server and the Apache Software Foundation makes a ton of sense. Kernel, of course, OpenOffice, LibreOffice, stuff like that makes sense. But like I feel like when you're still trying to find product market fit, or you're trying to like reach that level of success, I don't know if the foundation model like is best. I'm not sure. I obviously have a huge bias here. I'll like share one story too, is at various points at HashiCorp's life, we of course talked to different foundations, including the CNCF, about possibly donating a project. I was always open to talking about that. And the question I always had when I came into these meetings, there were multiple, it was always like, what's the trade here? We give you this, but what do you give us? Like this is critical IP that we've raised money on, that I'm trying to build a life that I could work with on. Like, what's the trade-off here? And for us in our position, I never felt like I got an answer that made sense. It was like, you'll get speaking opportunities. And I'm like, we already speak at a few dozen conferences a year. It's like, you'll get marketing. It's like, we got marketing covered. You'll get more users. I'm like, we get millions of downloads a year. Like, what is actually happening here? And so at one of them, I asked another foundation, not CNCF, I asked them, I was like, if you'll split the development costs with us, then I'll call it good. And at the time, we were tiny. And even at the time, I was like, we're spending about $1.2 million a year in salaries. So if you give us $600,000 a year, then let's talk. And that was like a no. Their largest project, which is it was a very large foundation, was like, we only give 200 something thousand a year in development. I'm like, that's not even close to what we need. So this is the issue I come up with. And then what, like John said, as well as like, once it reaches a certain point and it sort of enters a maintenance mode, and you're in the mode where you don't want to break too many things because so much depends on this critical infrastructure, then the cost of maintenance comes way down. And then you want the guarantees of open governance and stability and things like that. It's difficult, but that's sort of my opinion on it.
Yeah. One of the projects that I maintain that I think even was used at HashiCorp was SPF 13 Cobra. And it's one of those just wildly ubiquitous libraries that I won't change.
Yeah.
And I've accidentally broken the past. And it's like, I don't want to go, breaking a bunch of these CLIs up in the ecosystem, and has reached that level of maturity where even the bugs I would call kind of features are just like part of the shape of the API.
Hyman's Law.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, we're not trying to find that, I guess, quote unquote, market fit. It's an open source library, but we're not, trying to gain a bunch of users. We're not trying to iterate really quickly on like what the shape of it looks like. It's just, community management basically, which I think
Totally.
Some of these ecosystems can do, or some of these foundations can really help with.
Yeah.
Brian, what are your thoughts on all this? I mean, you have kind of a unique position still within the ecosystem. I recently left the Linux Foundation, so I guess I can't comment anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you probably can comment way more than I can, but I think it really comes down to, honestly, original misalignment and with the NATS project. I think there's a lot of good that both parties can, or all parties can probably do now. But I think it's one of those situations where you don't know what's going to happen around the corner. Like, maybe we would have predicted that Terraform's the most popular way to ship your infrastructure. It's easy to say that now, but like, we would have thought NATS would have been as successful back in the day. So I think what it comes down to is, I think the CNCF is still it just hit 10 years. So like, they're still figuring out like, what's the next phase of this organization? How does it continue to do the best for like all parties in the ecosystem? So I'm appreciative in some of the responses that the folks that represent the CNCF have been doing that kind of help elevate that, but also I'm biased because they pay my salary today. So yeah, I think there's opportunity. But like, are you in like the better case scenario today with Ghostty, where you don't have to think about, whatever product market fit is for this thing? Like, you can really just kind of scratch the itch and build what you want to see in the world.
Yeah, I think the fundamental tension in everything we've talked about is that on the side of the project, there's a group of people that need to earn a living that they feel is fair in order to build this project. And Ghostty doesn't have that tension. Like, I explicitly do not want to make money from Ghostty. the extent that I want Ghost to be sustainable is that I want contributors to be able to be compensated to a certain amount. So I am sort of moving in the direction of forming, like literally, this was a meeting I had this morning. I'm talking to lawyers about forming a nonprofit so that money could be donated and I could donate money myself and send that not to me, but to contributors and try to figure out a system that works there. And I think that sends a very clear message of, once you donate IP to tax-exempt nonprofit, like there's really kind of no clawing that back. And so like that'll send the right message of what I'm trying to do there. But I think like that doesn't work for, you need to get to a certain point. And so I want there to be a blueprint for that. And I don't know what it is yet.
Yeah. I'm excited. I think that sounds amazing, honestly, for Ghosty. What's next for Ghosty? Any big feature adds that you're looking at now? I mean, it hit a big GA release and sort of went out of the beta that you had with the Discord and everything. What's next?
Yeah, there's a few different categories of things we're working on. One is just we're still missing a few like obvious terminal features. I think the one that has like 1,000 upvotes is search, which is kind of embarrassing that we don't have. But yeah, we're missing like sort of Control F, Command F search, scroll back search. So there's the basic features we're missing. There's a few of those. Then there's sort of the mature desktop app stuff that we're working on. So like the next version will be localized in like 20 plus different languages. And, it's not super exciting, but it is exciting for some of those people, right? And it's just something that you have to do for a sufficiently mature application to get widespread usage. And then the third is like the exciting stuff. And some of the exciting stuff that we're working on, at least I think is exciting, is broadly speaking, I like to look at like the GUI framework ecosystem out there, like Qt, GTK, AppKit on Mac OS, Win32, and all the other frameworks that Microsoft has for Windows. And I like to be like, what do they do that terminals don't have? Which is like everything, but like, what do they have that terminals don't have that makes sense? And bring it back, because a terminal is an application development platform, text application development platform, but an application development platform nonetheless.
Right.
So what higher level APIs we're missing? And so some of the stuff that we're working on right now is we brought a sort of VS Code style command palette to the terminal, and we're working on a new protocol for applications to be able to put all their actions in this like native thing. So imagine like opening up Vim, and instead of like hitting colon and tab to figure out everything you could do, just like hit Shift Command P like you would in VS Code, get a native widget pop up, and get a full mouse scrollable native list of everything Vim could do with a description, and just click it to do it. We're working on stuff like that in order to, I think, make TUI applications more attractive for people and also make it easier for developers to implement this stuff. So that's like one step on the way we're going. There's so much more that I want to do.
Yeah, this really has me excited. I'm a heavy user of NeoVim and all these different TUIs. One of my favorites is this thing called K9s, which opens up this like big thing for Kubernetes. And that was immediately, obviously, to me, one of the big innovations was basically like a library. Is it libghosty? Is that what I'm thinking of? Okay, yeah. And like, what were sort of your first principles thinking around like, okay, this is just not going to be like only a GUI, but like libraries that actually can be extensible and built on top of?
Yeah, on one hand, it was sort of a necessity because we were being cross-platform, and I wanted, as we talked about, the native apps to feel really native, and that meant not using something like GTK on Mac OS. And so I needed this separation between native GUI code, the Mac OS app for Ghosty is written in Swift, and then the core terminal emulation. And then the second thing is sort of that I looked at the ecosystem, Alacrity, Kitty, WesTerm, iTerm, Terminal.app, Windows Terminal. Like if you lit any of them, almost all of them re-implement core terminal emulation, and it leads to a huge functional inconsistency across all of them. And it's a waste of time. It's not the interesting part of a terminal. It's like the part that just has to work. It's not the part where I think you do a ton of innovation. And the Linux ecosystem has something like this, which is pretty good, which is called libVTE. There's about 50 terminals built on libVTE, but it's purely, I think, GNOME focused, and it works. And I'm like, I want to build a cross-platform libVTE, and probably like higher performance and things like that. So that was sort of the idea behind it.
Yeah.
I also just think there's a lot more applications now that aren't terminal applications that want to have a terminal in them. And I think VS Code is a good example. Like editors in general all have terminals in them. I think that makes a ton of sense. But I think that getting, VS Code using Xterm.js is as good of a library that is. Honestly, it's really good. It's just a little bit sad that you have to do that. And so I think like using a native hyper-performant, fully featured library makes a lot more sense for those use cases. And this all circles back to why I think that Ghostty as its own needs to live in a nonprofit and needs to be like totally unencumbered and stuff like that. Because if I'm trying to say that every application could have confidence embedding this thing, you need to have this strong message of mission statement of what you're trying to do here.
Totally, man. Well, I again, I commend you. You're doing me good because this is exactly the tools that I needed. I wanted to ask quickly about a tweet that you had the other day.
I'm scared.
I know.
I'm scared.
I know.
Post HashiCorp, my tweets have gotten a little bit more unhinged as I'm not like held back by PR fears. But okay.
Nice. That's great. So you said 2.5 years into the AI craze, I continue to firmly believe that if your company wasn't already interesting, succeeding without AI, then doing whatever plus AI, end quote, isn't going to save you. I just thought this was such a good take, given the number of like, just kind of like bolt-on AI things we see in the market today. So 2 questions. What in your eyes makes like a quote unquote good AI product? And why aren't you building AI products right now, I guess?
Man, there's so many ways to do it. Like, we don't have enough time to go into that without like, there's not going to be enough detail here that people are going to take some stuff out of context, I think. But anyway, I just think like, for example, there's a lot of companies that are just, doing like mail client, but with AI. But it's a bad mail client. The AI integration actually is pretty good, but the mail client sucks. And it's like, you still at the end of the day have to interact with the mail client. So that's just a concrete example of like, I just want a really good mail client. And I also want AI features, but I need the whole package to be good, basically. And I think there's a lot of funding happening right now and a lot of new products being shipped that are just like, X plus AI, and the X is not solid. The foundation isn't solid. And so that was sort of my core take. And I think I remember that tweet, and I mentioned in that same tweet that I think like editors like Cursor don't have a strong moat. And I think Cursor's AI is really good. I've used it. I'm a NeoVim user, but in the interest of open-mindedness and learning stuff, I've used it for a few things, and their AI integration's really good. But when I look at it, I'm like, okay, but what's stopping? Like, is there actually a moat here? Like, what's stopping Microsoft from doing this with VS Code or Zed from doing it in their editor really well, and they own all their IP? That's my feeling on it.
I am curious if you've looked at Avanti.nvim recently.
Yeah. Oh man, all that stuff's changing so fast. I used Avanti for a while. Hats off to the person who made that. And then I switched. I'm currently using Code Companion.
Oh, I haven't tried that one.
I feel like it's better. I don't want to piss anyone off, but like I've had better success with it.
Sure. I mean, you said it, like these things are moving just so fast. And
even with Code Companion, you can't like follow the tags. You have to use the master or main branch because it just moves so quickly that like if you want to use the latest models and stuff, like you can't wait for a release. So
yeah, it's moving so fast, and that moat just seems to get smaller and smaller with some of these things because if somebody can do this in a couple hundred lines of Lua or whatever, it's scary for anybody shipping a product that competes with that, right?
Yeah, I'm not in the AI space. I'm just a consumer, so I don't want to talk with too much confidence. But yeah, I think that practically speaking, like the example of how I switched from Avanti to Code Companion and I used Cursor, and I feel like I'm getting a lot out of these NeoVim, totally open plugins that are developed by one person. Like, I think it all shows that even if there is a moat, it's smaller than you probably think.
Yeah. Well, I could probably keep chewing your ear off about NeoVim and stuff, but Mitchell, are you ready to read?
I know how to read, so
Read.
Okay, so for today's reads, Brian, why don't you kick us off? Yeah, I had a read actually in this kind of the segue what we just talked about. Blog post from continue.dev. Company's called Continue, but their website's continue.dev, about collecting data on how you build software, kind of really asking the question around all these prompts you're adding to these chats. It's like extremely valuable. So like I have a team of engineers working on Ghostty, and they're asking like, hey, can you prompt this to like get education around this part of the code base to then write this test and etc. Like there's a lot of really valuable commentary that can be sourced into, hey, there's some documentation, edge cases and etc. So this actually came out in 2023, summer of 2023. So it was like pre like the sort of Cursor wave and even like whatever Copilot's doing today. I thought it was really interesting because I got to thinking about this other tweet I saw from Swix about this feature, OpenAI, where you could just like opt in to like share your your information and you get free 1 million tokens a day, which going back to like the copilots and all these other tools, like how valuable this information is and how they'll be able to advance their product. Perhaps all this data is like, we're just leaving it on the table. So it's got me thinking about like how I interact. I've been using a lot of local model stuff, like the Llama Coder and Quinn, which I know you'll talk about that later, John, and trying to sort of build my own code assistant local that doesn't have to depend on, a Claude subscription and et cetera. So I thought those were interesting things to share, and happy to hear any commentary on that.
So it's kind of the idea that, you can not just look at the code, but also like, maybe methodologies, things that kind of go beyond docs. I'm almost thinking like tribal knowledge. If somehow you could like put that down into a model, and then it could kind of understand almost that like senior developer intuition or something.
Actually, I mean, that's actually the best way to place like the kind of places. So Mitchell, I don't know if you know my background, but I worked at GitHub for 5 years, and I was like GitHub Actions, I was the DevRel side of that. So got to do a lot of storytelling and building examples. And one of the easiest things I did in my job was go through the discussions and the forum of like, what are the most popular questions being asked and what's upvoted the most, and then create content around that.
Mm-hmm.
So blog posts, video, whatever, conference talks,
Yeah.
anything that I got upvoted the most. And like Stack Overflow, same deal. And like that's like my success in doing DevRel is just go look for answered questions. So then when you look at the answered questions inside the prompt, it'd be nice to get that sort of data, which again, no one's really doing anything with this right now. I don't think there's one feature or a one product that actually lets you look at what chats are happening or what you've looked at previously. Like even with Copilot, your history is only to the session. I don't think you could go look at what you asked last week.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot being left on the table on us being able to like, one, leverage AI for the benefit of programming, but two, like how do we learn? Okay, I keep struggling with this thing that can't fix bugs because I'm like stuck in agent mode in this like weird debugging loop.
Yeah. I like the analogy too of making it a senior engineer. That's definitely something that I'd find useful. There's this like website called DeepWiki, I think. I think it's like fairly mediocre. Again, don't want to piss anyone off, but I think it's just fairly basic. But if you go to DeepWiki and I think you append any GitHub project, or maybe it's curated, but it clearly runs the whole code base agentically over and over through an AI and builds architectural docs for various projects. I only found out about it because Ghostty just popped up on it. And I was reading it, and there's a lot of crap, but also at the same time, I was like, yeah, I mean, this isn't written down and this is close. It's pretty interesting. You could just like pull up PostgreSQL and just like see how like the backing stores work and stuff like that. And again, I don't know how much of it is true because based on Ghosty's page, I have a lot of doubts, but the idea is really cool.
I love it. I think it's like one of those things that will just continue to be like the next step of building this like, I don't know, maybe infinite web of knowledge and things just to continue to feed into agents and models and all these things.
Well, I think the most annoying thing about AI right now is managing context. If you could solve that, however it's solved, I don't know, because again, I'm not the expert, but as a consumer, if I could not manage context, then I think we're going to be in a much better place. I feel like most of my success learning how to use these tools like Avanti, Code Companion, Cursor has been figuring out how do I open the right buffers and share the right things so that the answer is going to be higher quality. And it's this like really silly thing that I feel like I'm not going to need this skill in a few years. But yeah, that's sort of where I'm at now.
Yeah, that's so fascinating because as somebody who's built agents and like some frameworks and libraries and stuff for AI, usually the most arbitrary thing is just like, okay, take the whole history, slap it back into the model, and then it'll regenerate the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just kind of keeps going and going and going until that context window gets too big.
Yeah.
And there's so many tools that are so good for search, indexing. I mean, I yearn for the day when somebody plugs in, I don't know, OpenSearch into, whatever LangChain's graph thing looks like, and then it can like more intelligently look back into its previous history versus just like, okay, here's the whole context window, right?
Yeah.
Which really, I think, just shifts it to the consumer, to you, to manage that and kind of be like, hey, please don't regenerate the entire file. Just tell me how this one, function works or something, right?
Yeah, I don't use LSPs. And I use Copilot for like autocomplete across my project, which like people sometimes have a allergic reaction to. And I'm like, it's pretty good enough. But like I've realized like as people have challenged me on that, I've looked at my workflow and thought about it. And one thing I noticed that I do is like when I want to complete an API call that I know is in a certain file, I'll open that file in like a split, and then I'll go back and get the autocomplete, and it usually gets it right. Because like I just like naturally, organically learned that, oh, Copilot's kind of like totally opaque in how it works. It's not open source, but like I've like learned that it must be sending other buffers or most recently access buffers as context. And so I learned like, oh, if I open it, my cursor goes there, my cursor comes back, I hit insert mode, the right thing pops up this time. And now I just do it so fast that like it's become automatic. And then when I watch someone struggle and say Copilot is terrible and like they struggle, and I'm like, it's because you're not doing this thing. But then I realize the thing is a little bit irrational. So it's funny that way.
Yeah, fascinating.
I love that this workflow. And I was going to say that I'll mention one comment. I'll let you, John, you can move on to the next thing. But I started writing tests. I was writing a bunch of Ruby code last weekend. And I come from like the test-driven development Ruby world. So it's like, oh, in my brain, like write the test and the code will be generated through agent mode. Like perfect. And that was 100% true. Like test-driven development works with agents. In the context when you can kind of limit it to, I want it to work in this way and click like these methods and functions and stuff like that, I was actually shocked on how performant it was for me.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit manual, but getting agents to at least execute, if not write tests in addition to writing code and looping on that is like unreasonably, uncomfortably effective for me as a developer. And yeah, I mean, I think the zero shot write this function and have it work is like in the year 2025 kind of a pipe dream for most things, unless there's like really hyper common JavaScript scenarios or something, or Python. But the idea of like write a test, write some code, re-execute, and just like let that agent spin and probably cost you like $10, let that agent spin for like the next half hour, it gets pretty scary close to success every time. And yeah, that's the only like, that's the thing that really has me like thinking about what does this look like a few years from now?
Yeah. We're down the rabbit hole now. I mean, I'm curious how it is for Zig.
Pretty bad.
Pretty bad? Okay. I remember years ago, it's so bad for Rust when I was writing a ton of Rust. And I almost would just, I guess this was like GPT-3 5 days, but I would just give up usually.
It's gotten a lot better. Like the Copilot, like complete a line thing is all pretty solid at this point.
Okay.
But the bigger, like write multiple lines, do stuff like that, it's pretty bad. Usually my trick is I have it write C.
Oh.
And then I as a human, just convert that to Zig. If you ask it to convert it to Zig, it'll hallucinate a ton of syntax that doesn't exist. So, but C is such a widespread language, and there's so many code bases that have been trained that I find that it's really good at that. So if I'm actually working on something, I'll just have it iterate through and write a bunch of C.
Man, I'm gonna have to adopt some of those workflows. But
again, stupid tricks, like I do that so naturally, and I get success, and then I have to just remember that when I like talk about how I'm using AI in a successful way, and people are dumbfounded of how that's possible, and I have to remember that I'm doing weird stuff that like I've adapted to.
Yeah, I think I was a fairly early adopter of some of this AI stuff. I think I've actually gotten worse at like using it. I think early days I was like, you will write a test. You will, and I was very specific on what I expected. And now it's almost like, and maybe this is like the AI brain rot, I don't know. But like now I'm just like, do a thing, and I don't always give it enough context. And I realize that, it's probably just like a separate skill I need to continue to.
I think it's like, I started using 4.1 from OpenAI last weekend on like a small little like toy project. And I started at 3.5 because like for cost reasons. And then once I got comfortable that the code was going to work, the product works, and I don't mind people using it publicly, I switched to 4.1, and like it can one shot, which the product is like, I can take a pull request and I generate a blog post. And this is more of like the scratching itch for myself, but it's worlds better when it comes to 4.1 that I can just be okay with like a one shot experience. But I imagine it's going to degrade. It's going to get worse. It's OpenAI. It's a little black box of like whatever they ship every 3 to 6 months will definitely break everything. But at the end of the day, it's like we have our weird tricks up our sleeves, and we kind of figure out how to like hold it right or hold it wrong, whichever one you want to say.
Yep. Yeah.
But eventually that will change.
Totally.
Wild. We need to write a book on like how to use AI.
It'll be invalid in like 3 months.
Yeah, AI for dummies.
Well, speaking of AI, I'll move on to my reads. One was this post that I wrote actually on opensourceready.substack.com. Listeners, go check it out.
I don't think we mentioned that we have a Substack on the podcast yet. So,
Oh, well.
yeah, worth mentioning. We have a Substack.
We have a Substack. We're doing it. Yeah, this was a post I wrote sort of, I don't even know what to call it. It was almost a rant, almost a like open sourcey manifesto, but it was titled maybe hyperbolic, but there is no open source AI. And I think it came from a place of kind of going crazy hearing some of these companies call open source AI, quote unquote, open source, and it's really not. And, I dove deep into the, Stallman-y definitions of some of these things. I don't know. I'm curious, Brian, your thoughts on this. I got some like good conversation from the OSI, who has their own definition of what open source AI looks like. What did you think about it, Brian?
Yeah, and we had Avi on here to talk about open source AI definition, episode 3, I guess. I don't know. I probably should have got that number right. But yeah, I think it's just one of those deals where everyone's kind of running towards like a land grab right now. So like what we got from OpenAI was almost open source AI, and then they caught that back a bit when they got 3.5 or 3 out there. So now we're all kind of making it up as we go along when it comes to like open weights and like what's open and what Llama's definition and like whatever that is, if you have a X amount of users. So I think what's helpful is like ironically, DeepSeek, like shipping what they did, that kind of exposes like what the cost actually really is. And like we have a window of opportunity of folks saying, okay, and maybe it's like similar to what you're doing with Ghostty, Mitchell, but like maybe someone who's going to be benefited having somebody do proper open source AI and like set the tone or the pace for what we can do and not be so, this is my walled garden and that's theirs and etc. So I love the post and I would encourage everyone to read it and like gather their own opinions as well.
Yeah, Mitchell, how do you typically think about like open source in this kind of non-traditional software sense with like AIs that they claim are open?
Yeah, and I read your post and there's 2 questions like popped out at me. One was like, I think, not even question, like one thing I was really nodding at was like the issue with copyrighted material. Like I've said before that like even as a consumer of AI, like I want that to go to court just so I could have an answer. Like I just want the precedent out there to know what the hell we're supposed to be thinking about this. Like I had this case happen with Ghostty where Ghostty is MIT licensed and a lot of terminals out there are GPL. And so we can't look at them. I can't look at them. And
oh, wow.
We had an issue say, I want to see this feature. Here's how iTerm implements it and like pasted it in there. And I quickly edited it, deleted it, responded, said, hey, we can't paste iTerm source code. I didn't read it, but I can't trust you to contribute this anymore. So we need someone else to contribute it.
Yeah.
And then he responded saying, okay, well, I asked ChatGPT and it generated this and it works. And I was like, is that safe? Did that like launder through the system to where it's now legal? I don't want to think about that. I want a court to tell me no or yes. I don't care either way. I just want to know the answer. So that stood out as me as something like I really want to know and also like totally makes sense as an impediment to true open source. The second thing that sort of popped out was like, it made me wonder, and this is totally a question. I would love to see like data on this. It made me wonder if like, does all innovative new technology have to go through a fairly long cycle, years-long cycle of proprietary first in order to figure it out before the commodity open source versions that become very good, that sometimes exceed them in capability, but before they could become successful? And I was just like thinking back in terms of like, has there been examples of like new database paradigms that were successful open source first, or was it like Oracle and Windows, server and stuff like that like had to like be way advanced first, and then now we're at the point where it's such a commodity that all these other databases are very, very, very good. I thought about VMware with virtualization, like they hit the hypervisor first. KVM was a joke for a long time. All these things now, KVM is like super, super good, but like it had to lag behind that proprietary timeline. Like, are we in that same phase with AI here where we're in the proprietary, a bunch of people are going to make a ton of money, whatever, but like we're in this phase where it's too new that you need all this like boatload of funding that's happening to make it work. And then we're going to look back 10 years from now and all the true open source versions are going to be king because it's like a commodity at that point. I don't know.
Yeah.
I would love to know actually if that pattern has existed.
I think what worries me though is that this whole thing feels like, and I think I said this in the post, it feels like this big race to the bottom where that bottom is either some technological barrier with the transformer models or whatever current AI technology we have, and we're just never going to get past that, or we have to invent something new, or we hit some crazy basilisk super AI god, and there's no like putting a Pandora's box back on top of that. So I think, I don't know how to answer your question because it feels like a whole new class of power and like technology that I almost don't even know how to like classify it beyond like, it's so many things. It's got copyrighted material in it. You know, nobody has a cluster of H100 sitting in their house even to reproduce it if they did have the copyrighted material and the entire contents of the internet. So like, we as the consumers are almost just expected to like, no, it's okay. It's open weights. You can, download the 14 billion parameter one and you'll be fine with that. But you're going to buy our service because you want the like good thing.
Yeah. That's what I was wondering when I was reading your post too, is like, if you had a truly open source version, like no one can afford to reproduce this. Like even the cheapest, even there's a lot of controversy of whether how accurate it is, but even if you take it at face value with what DeepSeek was able to do, it was still astronomically expensive from like an individual standpoint. Like,
yes,
it's not like the Linux kernel where you could use a 10-year-old laptop, download the kernel, and actually build it. Like you can't do that with in theory even.
Yeah. I've been slowly chugging through this book, Free Software, Free Society, which is like the essays of Richard Stallman. And it is crazy because the beginning days of GNU and his time at MIT, like he was sort of stealing time on these like very early days, mainframe computers that, you had to go like actually schedule time to like run your programs on and stuff. It sort of feels like that, where like it would almost take like a, I don't know, like a new age Richard Stallman to get on a big cluster of H100s to like truly, jailbreak it into the open, right?
Yeah. And I think we're in this weird place where like, I want nothing more than to run local models. And Brian, you talked about you're like experimenting with that. Every time I've tried that, it's just been too slow, too expensive, too low quality. But like, I really want to get there. And so I'm hoping, even I'll just be generous, I guess. Like as a consumer, I feel like 5 years is probably safe. But like, Apple's already making laptops. I think they're making laptops that have like, well, I know my laptop has 128 gigs of RAM, which is absolutely absurd. And like, I think if you get to the point where you could get to 256 in a laptop form factor, I think their Studio could do that now. But like, if you get to that in a mobile factor, then like it starts getting a lot more realistic. And like that becomes really interesting if you could dedicate 200 gigabytes of your RAM to running a fairly large model.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only way I'm able to do it is run it on my PC that has a GPU in it and use Tailscale to then point that to Olama. So like that's the closest to self-hosting, but it's like not on the laptop itself. Because I've got a regular Pro with I think like 32 gigs. So like no way I'm running like a full Llama there.
Yeah. Well, this has been an amazing discussion. Mitchell, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and giving us your candid thoughts on open source and AI and everything. Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I hope people don't take too much offense to some of the stuff I had here. I think like I'm still trying to figure it out myself. We're always growing. We're always learning. I'm trying to take it all in and figure it all out.
Yeah, as we all are. Well, listeners, remember, stay ready.
That's all the time we have for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us at x.com/opensourceready. Open Source Ready is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor of developer-first startups. For more information, visit heavybit.com.